Hello and welcome again to another episode of Dr. Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories. In this podcast series, we focus on how storytelling can be such a source of inspiration for us in our professional lives, a somewhat underrated, underappreciated medium for finding answers to questions that are otherwise somewhat elusive. Helmut and I have been focusing on different ways to inspire answers to questions that I think are elusive in professional life. And we have done that through our books, and we are doing that through this podcast series. We have been amazed at how well the last few podcasts have gone. The guests that we have had have been extraordinary, and today we are joined by someone who is one of the most famous Greeks that I have ever met. I mean, we talk about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, although strangely, I didn't realize David Sedaris, and there's a few others that are contemporary, but the most famous of all, Demis Roussos, who is, I know, a personal hero of Angelos, who is our guest today. So welcome, Angelos. We will follow the format that we normally follow here, which is that we'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll ask you to share a story, and then we'll discuss why it resonates with you and perhaps why it might provide some inspiration for other people.
Super. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really honored to be part of the podcast series.
Great. So Dr. Angelos Gkanoutas Leventis, he's not your average energy economist unless your average energy economist writes books on oil price shocks. I have a personalized copy. I've been reading it. One of the things that I was most amazed by was this OPEC gentleman, Ali Al-Naimi, who walked through the streets of Vienna, apparently, for years ahead of these OPEC meetings, and then journalists followed him. I don't know, Helmut, whether or not you came across this OPEC gentleman while you were having coffee in Vienna one morning.
Well, I'm right here in Vienna, and you see many OPEC people in Vienna because, around OPEC it's full of people from OPEC. So I might have seen him in one of the nearby coffee shops at one point in time.
So Angelos and I first met in Abu Dhabi. Prior to doing that, Angelos had completed his PhD. This book is, to some extent, a synopsis of this PhD on the financialization of the oil market, which is required reading if you are in the oil business.
Or if you can't sleep at night, if you've got insomnia problems, then definitely go for my book.
He cut his teeth at Petrobras before joining BP, where he and I worked together. He worked initially in the shipping area, doing analysis of the chartering fleets. And then he came to work in Abu Dhabi. Now, his main criteria for working in Abu Dhabi was the job description, working hours, and what he would do at the weekend. And despite his fixation for working hours and what he would do at the weekend, he came to work with us in Abu Dhabi while we were helping ADNOC restructure its maritime and logistics business, and did an extraordinary job. Angelos is, to some extent, a force of nature. High energy, extraordinarily creative, is able to take $50 million worth of savings and halve them overnight. His PowerPoint prowess is unmatched. His ability to caress ears and say the word donkey in an extremely amusing way is also legendary. And he has interests which, in a way, I think, from a career standpoint, are interesting to pick apart. Not only is he a more than full-time chief of staff in BP's low-carbon renewable business, but he's also one of the founding fathers of the Greek Energy Forum. He's very active in that sense of politics and regulation and trying to create a low-carbon future. He is an artist. He is a very bad guitarist. He is a writer. He is a father. And he was telling me recently that he thinks he's at his best when he has other projects on the go. And he's now curating pop-up art exhibitions across, I think, initially Athens and then possibly London, which I think is an extraordinary advertisement for being able to do multiple things at the same time. The idea that we sometimes pigeonhole ourselves to say that we are just one thing. Angelos bucks that trend brilliantly. But above all, I think Angelos is just a very nice guy. So at this particular stage, let me hand it over to Helmut. What are your memories of working with our dear friend Angelos?
Well, thank you, David, for basically teaching me so many things about Angelos. I've not even realized that it was there. But even before that, I always admired Angelos because for me, he's really, and you might be not surprised to hear that, is you epitomize the future of work. You epitomize for me the kind of employee companies want to have, need to have, and must really protect and treasure. Because what really always impressed me, yes, you're very smart. Yes, you have a PhD. Yes, your intellect is off the charts. But what I always liked, your positive attitude towards anything and everything. It's always can do, we can do. But the other thing is that a corporate life never limited you. And I think that's so important, yeah? Because most people work for corporations, they have so many limiting beliefs. You never had limiting beliefs, and I'm really delighted that you still work for BP, because I think BP needs people like you who are entrepreneurs at heart, but still are prepared to work in the context of corporate policies and constraints. Probably one of the most delightful people to work with, and I was delighted to hear that you're also like an artist, which I didn't know before. So over to you and your story that you brought us.
Guys, before I go into the story, first I want to say I'm truly humbled by your intros. And David, you mentioned it being a genuinely good guy, and very recently I turned 40, and as you mentioned, very recently I became a father as well. And I decided to do this exercise and to write a letter for my son to open when he turns 40. And, I'm still in the process of drafting it and redrafting it and thinking about what is important for me to write in there, because I might be there next to him when he opens it, or I might not. I think it's really important to make sure that I get rid of all the noise and just focus on the things that I truly, really want to pass on to him, my thoughts, my fears, my expectations. And, ultimately where I'm getting to with this is, what I care about is that he grows up to be a good man, a good person, right? What he does, whether he studies, whether he works and he becomes a CEO of a company or whatever, that's noise. That is not what... So, anyway, enough about that. Let's move into the story, because I hope it's a good one. I thought long and hard about the story that I would bring in today's conversation. And initially I was going to go with a story from my professional life, but then I thought, no, you know what, I'm going to go with a folklore story and bring a connection to that, connected with my professional experience. So the story that I'm going to share is that of the eagle who thought it was a chicken. And it starts with a farmer who was walking in the mountains one day, and he found a fallen eagle's nest. Inside that nest there was one unbroken egg. And he really didn't want any wild animal to find that egg and eat it. So he took it home and placed it with his chickens. The hens were surprised when they saw the egg, but they kept it nonetheless, and they kept it warm and, helped it hatch as if it was one of their own. Soon the baby eagle was born, hatched, and he was raised by the chickens, and it came to believe it was a chicken itself because it was surrounded by chickens. It learned to act like them, pecking at the ground, flapping its wings just a little bit, never enough to fly. It watched birds fly in the sky, and something deep inside it stirred, but it always shook that feeling off. I'm just a chicken, it told itself. The years went by, and one day a visitor came to the farm. He saw the eagle and he said, "That's not a chicken, that's an eagle." The farmer laughed and he said, "Maybe it was born an eagle, but it does not believe it is an eagle. It thinks like a chicken, it acts like a chicken, and it doesn't know how to fly." That story didn't sit very well with the visitor. So that evening he took the eagle to a high cliff nearby. The wind was strong, and he said, "You're not meant to stay on the ground. You're made to fly. Spread your wings and fly." The eagle was scared. It held on to the rock, and it chose to walk back to the farm. The visitor didn't give up though. The next day he took the eagle and he went back to that cliff. And again he said the same thing, "You were born to fly." And he did that day after day. Until one morning the sun rose and something had changed. The eagle looked up at the sky. It felt the wind. It opened its wings wider than ever before. It stepped forward and jumped. The wind lifted it. The eagle flew higher and higher, above the hills and above the clouds. And it never went back to the farm after that. That's the story, guys.
Yeah.
Great story.
Great story.
Great story.
It is a great story. And I think I've heard versions of it. although you put your unique spin on it a little bit there. Why did you choose that, Angelos? Why does that have meaning for you?
It's a story that when I read it, it really hit close to home with me because I can relate to it in so many different levels. It really reminds me of the path that my career, my corporate career, has taken over the years. Because for I would say the first years of my career, I was pigeonholed and I was defined on what I should be doing and how I should be thinking about my career by my environment and the job that I had and the people that surrounded me, who in many ways were, and this is not to blame anybody because that was the nature of the job, but they were pushing me to rein in all the things, all the characteristics that make me who I am. And I was forced to be put into a box that really I didn't fit that well. I was okay at it, I was good at it, I could perform, I could deliver everything that I had to deliver, but I wasn't having fun. I was really hating my job, to be honest. For this reason, I had to create outlets outside of work in order to channel all my energy and creativity. That's when I founded the Greek Energy Forum, for example, because I needed to have a space where I could be myself outside of work. And work became this necessary evil that you work in the morning because you have to work, you have to make money, you have to have a career. But then, the moment I would shut down, I would just move into my own project and focus on that because that's what was bringing joy to my life and meaning. And it all changed one day when I got a call by somebody who's actually sitting in this podcast today. And he told me that, look, I've got this crazy idea. We're going to run a project in Abu Dhabi, and why don't you come and join me in changing the way that a company works? And for me, at that point, that idea was crazy. It was absolutely insane. It was completely undefined. There was no job description, no contract, nothing, absolutely nothing. And I was conditioned for the previous 8 years of my career that these were the important things. Where was the job description? Where was, a clear definition of what you need to deliver? If you don't have that, then how are you supposed to deliver against something? And how do you measure performance? And how do you do all this stuff? And it's sort of like Stockholm syndrome, right? I have grown to know that reality, and I thought that was it. And I not loved it, but I had accepted it. So, it was very interesting because I took that leap of faith, and contrary to a lot of advice that I was getting from colleagues and people saying like, this is insane, you've got a career here, why, a path forward, why would you risk that? And I took that leap of faith from my side, and it paid off. I had somebody my own personal career guru, who really had the patience to coach me and to push me to actually break, all these things that I had programmed in me that were holding me back. And I remember feeling like a toddler who's testing the barriers and testing the limits and going like, can I actually do this? Let's look back and see, is anybody shouting, anybody going crazy that I'm taking initiative here and, doing something that people might frown upon? And then I was seeing supportive nods that, go ahead, continue as you do. And, little by little, suddenly I felt freed and I felt empowered to go and be myself. And I also felt that I had the support that I needed to go out and be who I am, and knowing that my manager or the people that I work for had my back in doing that. And that really unblocked me, it unshackled me to become who I am today and to really, drive that or discover and really define my superpowers at work. And I think we're going to get back to that in a minute, but that was like a light bulb moment where I realized, where it became clear to me what my superpowers were.
Released your inner Angelos Herodotus. What are your, Helmut, what's your reflection on the story?
Well, my reflection on the story is really about limiting beliefs, and I love the story because it's my belief as well. The first 15, 18, 20 years of your life, you're conditioned to conform. Conform to school, conform to your friends, conform to your parents, conform to expectations, yeah? And so for me the question is, what is the trigger event that you decide, well, it's not the only way to live a life, a career, there are different ways, yeah? Now the question, and this is a question to you, Angelos, yeah? Not everyone has a Mr. Dr. Oxley basically saying, come to Abu Dhabi, yeah? Does it take this trigger, take this external intervention influence, or can people create this context, the condition themselves? Because that's for me always I know so many people have been complaining about corporate career for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and then they retire and they still complain. And so the question is, what does it take to liberate? Can people do it themselves, or does it take it Dr. Oxley?
That's a great question, Helmut. I've been thinking about that over the past few days and reflecting on the storm, my experience. And for me, yes, it was that moment, that external force that helped me do this. But I don't think that it is a prerequisite. I think that somebody can deliver the same result by himself. Because what I concluded was, a career is like, you've heard this notion that life is a sum of choices, right? And a career is exactly the same. It's a sum of choices. So in order to be so if you follow that line of thought, then optionality is highly valuable in a career, having options. And what you're really looking for, therefore, is how can you create an environment that fosters the creation of options for you? And I think that is an equation that needs to balance three things. One is substance, that you need to know what you're talking about. You need to be good at what you're doing. You don't necessarily need to be the best at what you're doing, but you need to know what you're doing. It's proximity, being present. If you're not present, people don't know you, chances and opportunities are not going to come to you. And the third one is luck. But, luck, yes, some of it is out of our control, but you also create a bit of your luck, right? If you're interested about something, you can network, you can share ideas, you can be active within that space. So as long as you, I think, balance proximity, substance, and luck, you create options. And the more options you have, the more opportunities you have to jump out of a rut or a career that is not necessarily what you want. Or if you get all these options and you choose to stay, again, it's your choice and that was what you preferred to do. So I think it's all about choice. And maybe upon reflection, I'd say getting the job with David to go to Abu Dhabi was an outcome of me having the substance and the proximity and a bit of luck, because I had actively networked and interviewed to get a transformation job in another project, and I had impressed the people who were interviewing me, and I impressed them enough that they called out. When they heard that David was putting together a team to go and run a transformation project, they reached out to David and said, hey, we've got Angelos who we think that would be a great fit for your team. So it's a little bit of, I had the background to be able to deliver this job. I actively chased these kind of opportunities, and the timing worked and I was a bit lucky. If it wasn't for this project, it would have been something else, probably. So I think it's all about creating optionality in your life and in your career.
I think it's fascinating to talk about this conditioning, because I think it can come from at least a couple of different directions. You talk about environmental conditioning, and in a way that's what the story is about. The idea that the eagle is put in a set of circumstances, the nature and nurture piece where they're put in the chicken hen. And so in that context, we talk about how organizations can constrain you, how they limit you, how they create a paradigm that is promoted as the normal paradigm. So in one of the books we've written, The Groundhog Career, we talk about game playing and how you learn intuitively how to play a game at work. But you also learn what the limits are of that game, and you kind of conform to it in a way, because that's the expectation of how you succeed in that game, how you win at that game. And so it's interesting how that works. But I think I also want to point out that we can constrain ourselves, we can condition ourselves, our expectations can, we start to lower our own horizons, and continually trying to strive is something that I think can be quite difficult. And I think that's also a factor. Is that something that you felt existed in some form? Because you always struck me as someone who never tired of being creative.
I guess so. There's a very interesting theory, David, in social sciences called the theory of performativity. And this theory focuses on how the definition of words that we use or rules that we set for ourselves then shapes the behavior of society. So For example, we've set the KPI of inflation and we measure economic performance of countries based on inflation and GDP. But then essentially the systems are set up in a way that now look at only those things, but there might be other parameters that would be normally really, really important in measuring the performance of an economy that we disregard because we've conditioned to look at those two metrics primarily. I think that in a corporate environment, having external mentors and having a network does help in seeing a little bit what else is out there. But my experience on that, because I had a very strong network through the Greek Energy Forum, I knew a lot of people from the industry, from other companies, it never had the same impact that the internal BP network had with me. Because the internal BP network understood better the politics and the challenges of within that corporate structure. And also it's very easy when you look at things outside to dismiss them and say, but that is, that's a great thing about that company, but they have all these other bad things that I don't really like, so I completely disregard, what they're doing on that front. Especially with oil and gas companies, you end up comparing a lot of times apples with potatoes, right? National oil companies with international oil companies, with energy utilities, and then it's very easy to dismiss things. So I do agree with you, but I would say that mostly comes on a personal level, not so much a career level. The internal corporate mentors, let's say, or network, I would say, at least in my experience, had like a 5x impact on my career.
Helmut, anything more on the story?
Yeah, I mean, the story for me is actually not directly to the story, but you said one thing very early in the podcast. You said, well, basically before Abu Dhabi, there was BP, there was basically a 9-to-5 job, or it was 9 to 7 or whatever. But there was the certainty of having a certain income, and then you got the excitement, your entrepreneurial spirit outside, yeah. And I find that really, really interesting, yeah, how you said, I need optionality, you need to basically just explore things, yeah. How has being or turning 40 and having a child changed your risk tolerance or appetite? I find that always very interesting, yeah, because I do believe having your first child is a life event. How have you changed, or do you say, no, I haven't changed at all?
Absolutely. I have absolutely changed on that front. Yes, my risk appetite has definitely decreased. I wouldn't say disappeared, but you think about things twice. Now, it so happens that in my organization, we're going through a transformation, and I sort of had a choice to make between the job that I want to do once the transformation project ends. And without having all the information at hand, I had to make a choice. And I chose the safer path, or what felt like the safer path. And when I mean safer, it was working for people and with people that I know they're good, and I know that I will have fun working with, rather than going for the unknown and potentially working for an amazing team, or working for a team that I wouldn't enjoy, working for. I didn't want to take that risk. On paper, the unknown job, let's say, could have been more fun, but I decided to go for the safest option and go and work with the people that I know and trust, because at this point in life, I prefer to have stability. It's not about how hard I'm going to work or how cool the job is going to be or what the title is. It's not about that, but it's about knowing that I'll have a job that I'm going to be working with good people around me. I'm going to enjoy that job. It's not going to be something that at the end of the day I'm going to be looking forward to shutting down my PC and not having to think about it. I don't know if that makes sense or if it answers your question.
Thank you very much. I really like the honesty, yeah, because I really believe that's basically a reality of life. Things change when you have a family, and I think they rightly do, because you have responsibility for more than yourself. Excellent, thank you.
I think there's a distinction, though, that I'd like to amplify in what at least my impression is of where Angelos is currently in his career, that there is a temptation as you reach that sort of middle career, decade to start to put aspects of work on autopilot. And to Helmut's point, the idea of a salary is coming in, and if a salary is coming in, I'm going to turn my attention away. I'm going to cast my eyes to family, to, and our parents are getting older, and, our relatives are, perhaps the family is more distributed. You used to be in one city and now you're all over the world. And so you start to pay attention to different things, and in the process, pay less attention to what's going on at work. I think there is a distinction in what you said between taking less risk, but being very informed and being very engaged in making determinations about this opportunity versus that, and having your radar still very much connected to what's going on, as opposed to turning that off and paying less attention to it. And the reason I emphasize this is in the context of artificial intelligence, in the context actually to some extent of your story. The eagle sort of switched off. The eagle sort of said, okay, I'm not going to explore, I'm not going to attempt to fly. I see no one else doing it. And perhaps they spent their day trying to sit on eggs and hatch them. I don't know how deep we want to take that analogy. But the point being that there was a certain lethargy almost, a certain, not laziness, but, a certain acceptance. I think that there's something to be said about trying to keep that radar sharp and knowing what's going on and spending the time to continue to network and understand what's going on in your company, what the opportunities are. Is that something, Helmut, you still subscribe to?
Yeah, no, I still believe you need to calibrate. And in particular, when you do work for a company like BP that gives you enormous space and gives you access to a network of probably the brightest people on the planet, you sometimes tend to forget that. And people will leave the companies, and unless you really have deep conversation, you look out to see what's going on, you cannot calibrate. So that is very, very important. And I still would recommend everyone to do that. Every 2 or 3 years, just go out, interview, check your market value, think what's out there, and you probably in 80% of the cases, if you do work for a good company, decide to stay where you are. But the process in itself, I think, is very, very important. So, Angelos, just
okay.
One thing, I'm really, really interesting, and I think this thing you said is very interesting, and I know that we don't have time, but you said you basically went for the job that gave you a bit more certainty and stability, and I think everyone in your situation is probably going to do that, The problem is we are conditioned in a way that we make assumptions about what is stability and what is not stability, what is job security and not. I think the good thing about life is we can never predict the future, never, ever. And we tend to make life decisions based on assumptions that might hold true or not hold true. So I think I really like your story, I like your honesty. Brilliant. And now I hand back over to David, I think.
Well, only because we try and wrap these podcasts up in about 30 minutes. This is one of those situations, and we've had a few of them, where 30 minutes is just not enough. You want to keep talking, but...
Let's make an exception, David. Okay, this is a 45-minute podcast today.
Then he has to edit it down to 30 minutes or 20.
Well, it'll finish when it finishes, but let me move on to the final phase a little bit here, which is that we like to sort of wrap up on a more general note. And so as you reflect on where you are in your career and the experiences that you've had, the story, I think, promotes this idea of not getting pigeonholed, not getting conditioned to think just one way or to limit yourself. The idea of artificial limitations and understanding what they are. If you're giving advice to someone based on your own career experience, what's the one thing you would encourage people to do that in your experience has been extraordinarily valuable to you?
Well, I guess the first thing is what we said earlier about optionality, right? Create options for yourself. Put yourself in a position where you create the right environment for options to be created. The second thing is, and that's very hard to do, is understand what your superpowers are. And I know that it's a bit of a cliche, but it's not easy. At least in my experience, it took about 8 9 years for me to go like, you know what, this is what I'm great at, right? I'm great at, I have never ending energy, and I get very excited and very passionate about new ideas. And when that happens, I'm a force. I cannot be stopped. I mobilize people around me in order to make it happen, and it has to happen yesterday. It cannot happen today or tomorrow. And I'm great at doing that. So I'm the guy that you bring in when you want to go from 0 to 1. Right, I'm not the guy that you want for steady state. Now, the moment that I understood that and about myself, and I realized that, you know what, I enjoy being under pressure. I enjoy having to find solutions when everything is collapsing around me. That's when I have the most fun. Other people are in those kind of environments, when there's an announcement of a transformation project or, some change happening, people usually don't like it. I'm the one sitting on the background going like, yay, we're going to have fun. Of course, I've been lucky enough to get away from a lot of these projects unscathed, right? So I don't have the scars, let's say, to be afraid of them. But I think that you make your luck, you create your choices, and you navigate your way out of risk if that happens and when that happens. So I'd say understanding, narrowing down what your superpower is, what you're great at, and somebody at one point asked me, and I thought that was a great way to try and get to that, was if I start a company tomorrow, Angelos, why would I hire you? What is it that you bring? Of course, when they asked that question, I was still like, on the first or second year in my career, and my answer was something like, oh, I'm good at Excel, which is not the point, right? I completely missed the point at that. Hindsight now, in retrospect, I'm thinking about that question and I go like, yeah, this is why you bring me into a new company, because I can get you from 0 to 1, right? I'm the guy who gets things done.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. Helmut, what's your question for Angelos?
Yeah, the last question is always the question. If you had one tip, just really one tip. Second book, Shay is like 30. What is it, the one tip you would give a 30-year-old corporate employee, the one tip?
If you want to escape AI, dress up like a giraffe.
There's an inside joke and you need to explain that.
Well, I mean, when the third book comes out in November, all will be revealed. But there is a substance to that story where artificial intelligence was trained on pictures of trees in Africa, and most of them, or many of them, had giraffes in them. So the people thought they were doing the right thing by writing a subprogram to filter out giraffes. So there is truth to what Angelos just said.
But in all seriousness, if I was to say, the one thing is create optionality for yourselves, right? Having choices is the best thing that you can have in a career. How you choose and the path that you take afterwards, it's up to you. And, no regrets. Make your choices, no regrets. Just make sure that you get choices, the opportunity to have choices.
I think it's a great advice. It very much resonates with me as well. It's great.
Yeah. So, Angelos, thank you so much for entertaining us. Angelos has been a supporter of our mission here to reinvent advice for a new generation or a new audience. So we thank him for that. As we end up on this podcast, we'll do what we normally do. I do want to make a plug for anyone who's interested in the financialization of oil markets from 1980 to the present day. Spikes and shocks, I'm told that there are people in the world that still rely on this particular model to explain movements in the crude oil prices. In addition to which, Angelos is watch for his pop-up art exhibitions across, presumably it'll be like alleyways somewhere in Streatham or Brixton or something like this, will it? And
we'll see. But the name is very fitting. It's called OPA, which is Original Progressive Artworks.
And so on that note, do we do this again? Or is it not going? There we go.
I never loved a man more than you.
Yeah, never loved a man quite like you. As far as the Drs. Schuster and Oxley podcast, this podcast is part of a series that we're now on episode 7 or 8. So we thank everyone for contributing to that. If you've liked this podcast, please check out the others. At some stage, that link will appear on this particular screen. In addition to which, if you love the podcast, let me guarantee you will love the books. So you should go and buy the books if you haven't already. Failing that, check out our Instagram page, which is now very, very exciting with some new content. And finally, the website. The website has recently been relaunched to much fanfare. So I think go and take a look at that. Final words. Dear Helmut Schuster, final words?
Final words is actually I love basically corporate people, entrepreneurs, and people like art. I think art is really one of the most creative things, and I think that's probably part of what makes a great Angelos. Your love for so many diverse things. It was great. It was really a pleasure today. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks for
much,
hosting,
guys.
David.
This has been a huge honor and a lot of fun. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so on that note, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from
Mr. Helmut Schuster.